Mehdi Hasan debated somebody in the IDF, and we're going to react to it. Let's go.
So let's get to our opening statements. We want each of you to take a few minutes to explain why you're answering yes or no to our question: were Israel's actions in the Gaza war justified? And when I say were, I just want to be clear, we chose that word to talk about Israel's immediate actions after what happened on October 7th up through today. It's everything. It's not this moment, it's not that moment, it's the course of things.
On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated an act of genocide against the people of Israel. Its death squads invaded with a clear mission: to massacre as many people as they could, as sadistically as they could, and to take survivors as hostages. Hamas had a strategy to lure Israel into an urban war and generate enough suffering that the world would pressure Israel to leave Hamas alone to do it again and again. Hamas slaughtered 1,200 people on that day at a music festival and in their beds. They cremated little children alive. They perpetrated barbaric acts of sexual violence. They beheaded, tortured, and mutilated their victims alive and dead.
Listen, he had me in the first half. Like, it was, you know, I was like, okay, well, all right. He seems more sensible. I was actually just going to say, he seems more sensible and logical than the average IDF spokesperson, right? Or Israeli spokesperson, excuse me. He's not a part of the IDF. Or maybe he is. Fuck if I know. But right when he started talking about mutilation, beheaded heads, sexual assault, like, none of this has been proven. Every single news article that has reported that recanted those statements. I'm not saying something bad didn't happen on October 7th. I'm just saying that these exaggerations have not been substantiated. And that's the issue with Israeli spokespeople, right? Like, they exaggerate shit that's already been disproven or can't be proven, period. And you lose. Here's the thing, within a debate, if you over exaggerate an argument, you lose people. You have to state what happened as a matter of fact. And if you start exaggerating and shit, you start losing people, you know? And that's what he's doing.
And they did it with glee. And then they took over 250 hostages, including little children, paraded them through the streets of Gaza to jeering crowds, hid them in tunnels and homes where they are being starved and tortured and raped and executed.
Multiple hostages have came out and said that they weren't getting sexually assaulted or raped. And they said that they had doctors checking them. That's also false. Listen, I'm not pro taking hostages, okay? I'm just saying, like, fact is fact. That also hasn't been proven at all. Hostages themselves who have either been rescued in Israel's operations or were part of that exchange deal, they themselves said that they were not touched in any way. They were treated well. They said that what they were actually scared of was the Israeli missiles that were hitting around them because Israel either didn't know or didn't give a fuck that the hostages were around that area. So
it was the deadliest terror attack in world history after 9/11, the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and the opening shot of the Iranian regime's regional war against Israel on 7 fronts.
Bro, why do they always pull Iran into this shit? Like, I'm not saying Iran is, innocent, but it's just like, what does that have to do with fucking anything?
At this point, Israel faced a choice, as Hamas immediately threatened to do it again and again until Israel was destroyed. To do nothing, or to do something. Both would have consequences. Doing nothing meant letting Hamas get away with October 7th, leave it free to do it again and again, only this time with thousands of dangerous terrorists released from jail and with its popularity skyrocketing. That's not an option. Doing something meant targeting Hamas's terrorists in accordance with international law in order to dismantle their ability to wage war.
Did he just say in accordance to national law? His paycheck must be fat. He must be getting paid, because I can't tell you how many international laws Israel has broken in the past year. Not to mention that the ICC and the ICJ themselves ruled that Israel is a settler colonial apartheid state and is an illegal state. So their whole entire existence has already been proven and ruled to be illegal in the International Court of Law to begin with. I mean, that's crazy.
And live out that threat to do it again and again. That was the choice that Israel faced after October 7th. Now, after October 7th, that campaign to bring Hamas down and bring the hostages home was the only moral response. Hamas exists for the sake of war, and for the sake of peace, it must go. Let me explain Israel's strategy. Israel's strategy is to get civilians out of harm's way so that it can target Hamas's terrorist infrastructure under their feet. Hamas's strategy is to keep civilians in harm's way so that it can use them to shield their military infrastructure. Israel left Gaza in
Wow, not the human shields argument. It's been almost a whole entire year into this war, and they're still making the human shields argument. They're still making the human shields argument. Like, there has to be a point where you just gotta understand, like, that's not really... You can't just keep making the same argument over and over again when we know that it's bullshit. You know what I mean?
2005 and never wanted to go back, but Hamas seized power 2 years later, started firing rockets at our cities, and rigged Gaza's urban landscape for war. They dug a network of military tunnels 1.5 times longer than New York subway under homes and schools and hospitals. They booby-trapped tens of thousands of buildings. They started firing rockets at our homes and our towns from inside their schools and their hospitals. In response, Israel's actions are to target Hamas's terrorists and to take unprecedented efforts to keep their civilians safe from their own leader's sick strategy to sacrifice them on the altar of jihad. That's why it keeps repeatedly urging them to get out of harm's way from Hamas strongholds and flooding the area with over 1 million tons of aid, because it keeps saying this is a war against Hamas.
I mean, where do we even start? Do I even comment on how wrong he is? Because all of this has been proven. I mean, you look at the World Health Workers, they murder volunteer workers, they murder people that are handing out food, 130 plus journalists murdered, right? It's one of the biggest documented massacres of journalists in our time, just in history, period, as well. But also he's saying, like, we've sent over 1 million tons, like, there's no proof of that. There's absolutely no proof of that. The U.S. Department, official U.S. departments came out today and said that Israel deliberately held back aid, specifically aid that was being sent by America to Israel to go into Gaza. So, I mean, once again, when the departments within America themselves are claiming that this statement is false, you have to come to the conclusion that this is just a bunch of propaganda horse shit.
Not the people of Gaza. Now, the suffering of my neighbors in Gaza is horrific. I blame their psychopath leaders for launching this war, fighting it inside civilian areas, and refusing to release the hostages and surrender. Now, tonight's debate is about whether Israel's actions in the war in Gaza are justified, in a context in which I hope we can all agree none of the enemy's actions are justified. Because we are fighting a jihadist army that has as much respect for humanity and law as Mehdi Hasan has for the truth. Mehdi may say, I condemn Hamas's acts on October 7th, but he will not condemn its strategy because he is part of its strategy. Hamas is counting on its defense attorney to shield it from the consequences of the war that it started and deflect blame onto Israel so it can do October 7th again, maybe because they share a goal that Israel shouldn't exist. Mehdi Hasan will say tonight that October 7th does not justify Israel's actions in this horrible war.
I'm sorry, this intro is way too long. Like, can you wrap it up, please?
My question then is this.
Ilan, I'm sorry, your time is up.
What does October 7th?
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Yeah, I was about to say, that shit was dragging on.
Ilan, in already calling your opponent a liar, you have already crossed one of the lines of the culture that we try to establish here. I wish you hadn't.
You don't... I don't mind. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I can do that.
You don't need to do that to make your case, please.
Piers can never. Piers Morgan who? Piers Morgan who? Is my question. This is how Piers Morgan needs to conduct his debates.
Mehdi Hasan, you are answering no in answer to the question, were Israel's actions in the Gaza war justified?
All right, so, ladies and gentlemen, the question, were they justified? Were the actions justified?
And it would be great if you didn't feel the need to respond to the personal attack, because it'll waste
We'll
time.
decide when we get there, John. Were they justified? No, obviously not. Of course not. October the 7th, I think we can all agree, was a crime, a war crime, right? We can all agree on that. And taking hostages is a war crime. And those hostages should be released. But to destroy an entire place, an entire people in response is never justified. Never justified. How are we still I don't understand how we're debating this more than 40,000 deaths later. I don't understand how we're still debating this sitting in the comfort of New York, 7,000 miles away from a place that the UN Secretary General has called hell on earth. Justified? Justified? Was Israel justified in carrying out one of the most intense civilian punishment campaigns in history, according to Dr. Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, dropping 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs on schools, hospitals, universities, bookstores, libraries, mosques, churches, refugee camps, apartment buildings, cemeteries, destroying a higher percentage of buildings in northern Gaza than the Allies destroyed in Dresden during World War II, reducing Gaza to 42 million tons of rubble while they got people out of the way? How is that justified? Dropping a bomb, for example, on a 6-story apartment building in central Gaza last October, killing more than 100 people inside, including more than 50 children, with no Hamas target in sight, according to Human Rights Watch, with no explanation offered by the Israeli military. Even till today, was that justified, Elon? Was Israel justified in telling people to go to safe zones and then bombing them and killing them in those safe zones? According to NBC, there were 7 deadly airstrikes between January and April in areas that the Israeli military...
Mehdi has this in the bag. And it's not just because Mehdi is a good debater and Mehdi is very intelligent and well-informed, because obviously all those things are true. But at this point in time, taking the Israeli side just has so many fucking flaws. It doesn't matter what debate you go into. You're going to get destroyed. You're going to get destroyed because one side is all a bunch of propaganda and bullshit. The other side is a bunch of fact that has come out by multiple different sources. So just like the layout of the debate, obviously this man, the Israeli spokesperson, already, at a huge disadvantage just because of the point of argument that he took. But also, yeah, if you go against anyone that knows basic information on both sides, you're gonna get destroyed.
It specifically designated as safe zones, killing Palestinian civilians like Sabrine Sakani, who was 30 weeks pregnant at the time. She was killed in a safe zone in April. Her little baby, newborn baby, died less than a week later. Was that justified too, Elon? Was Israel justified in killing a record number of kids in Gaza, 16,000 children, turning Gaza into what the UN has called a graveyard for children, according to Save the Children, killing more kids in the first 3 weeks that were killed globally in each of the past 4 years, killing little kids like 6-year-old Hind Rajab and her 15-year-old sister Leanne, firing 335 bullets into the car they were in. 335 bullets. And then killing the 2 paramedics who went to try and rescue them. Was that justified too, Elon? Was Israel justified in killing a record number of aid workers in Gaza? Right? A record number. Targeting again and again, systematically, car by car, according to Chef Jose Andres, a specifically, explicitly marked World Central Kitchen aid convoy killing 7 aid workers in the process. Was that justified? Was Israel justified in starving the people of Gaza, using food and water as a weapon of war, to quote both the EU and Oxfam? Was Israel justified in blocking aid trucks from going into Gaza simply because they carry things like crutches, nail clippers, and even chocolate croissants, according to the Washington Post? Was Israel justified in raping, sodomizing Palestinian detainees who were charged with no crimes whatsoever? Putting hot rods up their rectums, amputating their limbs, according to CNN and the New York Times. Was that rape and torture justified, Elon? Israel, according to the...
You know what's actually crazy to me? When you look at the evidence of rape and sodomy on October 7th and rape and sodomy that Israel has committed against Palestinians, we have video proof of that. We have proof that the Knesset in Israel was debating whether the sexual assault of Palestinians was okay. We have video proof of people in Israel going to the jail where they held those soldiers. They were breaking into the jail, demanding that these soldiers be free, because in their eyes, they don't see that as a crime. And for some reason, all we talk about is sexual assault on October 7th. something that has not been proved, something that has not been written about in any news article. And if it was written, they recanted because they couldn't find any proof of it. The double standards of like one side and the other is so wild.
The ICC chief prosecutor, who put out a statement calling for the arrest of Elon's former boss, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that Israel may have military goals, legitimate goals, but the way they're carried out, killing innocent people, starving people, is criminal, he said. Criminal, think about that. Elon Levy is a former spokesperson for a man who the ICC chief prosecutor once arrested for war crimes. Elon himself has produced a number of lies, sorry, John, in service of those war crimes. He has a bunch of tweets still up tonight which say that babies were beheaded on October the 7th, babies were baked in ovens, babies were ripped from their mother's wombs. October 7th was bad enough, but Elon had to exaggerate it for atrocity purposes. Those tweets are still up. Why would you trust anything this man says to you tonight? Look, he's here. He's here. He's here to gaslight you, to defend the indefensible.
Mehdi practiced that in the mirror. I just know he practiced that in the mirror. That was gold. That was gold. Let him cook. Let him cook.
To excuse the inexcusable, to justify the unjustifiable, but you don't need to. Tonight you can choose to be on the side not of cruelty, not of criminality, but on the side of the innocent people of Gaza who are being killed as we speak tonight, as we speak, by Elon's former colleagues in the Israeli military on the orders of Elon's former bosses in the Israeli government. So yes, I choose to oppose this horrific and homicidal motion. Thank you.
Elon, I heard you in your opening statement say that the only moral response was for Israel to try to take Hamas down and to get the hostages home. I heard your opponent say that the manner in which it's happening is just enormous overreach with enormous consequences for an enormous number of people that he would certainly say, and I think a number of others would agree, are innocent people, not all of them, but some of them, and that represents an unjustifiable response. What we're talking about, it seems like, is proportionality. And I want you to address the issue of proportionality. This has been calculated in a number of ways. People have said that, as you said, it was the worst terrorist attack since September 11th, 2001. But others would say that the number of people killed on both sides is wildly out of balance and therefore disproportionate. There's an issue to be discussed here. There's a principle to be discussed here, and that's proportionality. And what, in your view, justifies the proportionality that Israel has stepped up to in its response?
Israel's response is proportionate to the threat that we face, which is the threat of annihilation. After perpetrating the savage atrocities of October 7th, the first thing Hamas did was deny that it did them. The second thing that it did was to threaten to do it again and again until Israel is destroyed. That is what is at stake. If this war ends with Hamas free, emboldened, and empowered to perpetrate more October 7th massacres, thinking that the world will keep saving it from the wars that it started. Now, proportionality is a term in international law. It doesn't mean that if they kill 1,000 people, you kill 1,000 people and call it quits. It means that for each strike, the anticipated collateral damage, the damage to civilians, cannot be excessive to the anticipated military goal.
And your argument is that has been the principle Israel has observed.
Every military expert who has observed Israel's military efforts, including just recently in the Times, the Deputy Supreme Commander of NATO, has said that Israel is fighting in the most complicated urban battlefield that the world has ever seen, and he's satisfied that its rules of engagement and standard procedures are at least as rigorous as the UK and other Western allies. That's the former Deputy Supreme Commander of NATO.
Mehdi.
So I
don't even know what to say. Like at this point, if you want to argue the threat of extermination, Hamas doesn't have your numbers. Hamas doesn't have your power. Hamas doesn't have your support. What do you mean you're scared of them exterminating you? You compare Hamas and Israel. Hamas formed under blockade at the hands of Israel. Historically, Israel has been murdering Palestinians. I just don't really get it. You know what I mean? I don't like his argument. Like this potential of getting massacred doesn't justify mass murdering people. And I know Mehdi Hasan said 40,000. The Lancet estimates that the total number of deaths is over 200,000. And the Guardian is now estimating that the total amount of death is over 300,000. So I don't know about you, but I don't believe that the number of deaths is deadlocked at 40,000. It's been deadlocked at 40,000 for the past 6 months. I don't believe that. You know what I mean? And I think you have to be really naive to believe that it's only at 40,000.
I want to agree with something Elon said. Proportionality is a difficult subject, and we shouldn't talk about this in abstract. X number here, Y number there. Let's talk specifics. The problem with a lot of spokespersons of Israel, they want to talk in abstract. I want to talk in specifics. So if we talk about proportionality, we talk about discrimination, we talk about war crimes. Last October, shortly after October 7th, Israeli forces struck a 3-story residential building in Gaza City. They killed 15 members of the Al-Dos family, 7 children. According to Amnesty International, the survivors say no warnings. Elon told us there were warnings. No warnings were given to evacuate. Amnesty found no evidence of any military targets in the area, and Israel to this day has offered no explanation for that strike. So for the dead Al-Dos family members, Elon, can you tell us why they were killed?
Mr. Hasan, the IDF does not owe you immediate answers, and the fact that
This man's gonna deflect. This man's gonna deflect. He has no answer for that.
Amnesty speaks. The fact that
Gold standard of
Amnesty
military can't
speaks
answer a
to
simple
local
question.
witnesses intimidated by Hamas does not mean that there was not a military target.
But was
You take
there?
the
But
fact-
was there? Because Israel has never said there
Mr.
was a military
Hasan,
target.
Hamas booby-trapped 40% of Gaza's buildings. It dug tunnels underneath homes and schools.
We're back
and
to
hospitals.
generalities, Elon.
No, not
Why did you kill
generalities.
15 members of the
Mr.
Al-Dos
Hasan,
family?
I do
Let
not
him
know,
speak,
and I do
please.
not need to explain
You do.
every
You
single
literally
strike.
do. That's what you're here today.
Mr.
Here to
Hasan.
explain.
Mehdi,
No,
Hold
Mr.
it.
Hassan. Because in this war, Israel is seeking to neutralize the threat of a terrorist army that
Abstraction.
has a deliberate
Specifics, please.
strategy.
I'm gonna
of
have to get the mic cut
sacrificing
switched,
innocent
please.
civilians.
thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Hamas has a deliberate strategy of sacrificing its innocent civilians, and this is a strategy that you are enabling by always deflecting blame onto Israel instead of considering the real question of why Hamas built its military.
How is he deflecting blame to Israel when Israel is the one perpetrating all the violence? What do you mean you're deflecting all? What? I don't even know what that means. You're deflecting all of the blame onto Israel. Well, yeah, you're the one throwing the bombs. Like, what the fuck? I don't even know. I personally don't even know what that means.
Assets into civilian areas. Under international law, Israel is obligated to give precaution where those feasible precautions are possible.
Okay,
and
let's
it
let-
has done that by
let Mehdi come in,
repeatedly
please.
urging
To me, I need to say 2 things. 15 people were killed, 7 children. You were spokesperson for the Israeli government at the time. Israel has never given an explanation. When you say I do not need to explain myself, you literally do. You were the spokesperson for the government that committed a war crime, and you came to a debate tonight to defend war crimes. So you literally do. Number two, you'll notice, John, how Elon quickly went to abstract generalities. Let's talk specifics. Let's talk about tunnels. I think it's abhorrent to hide tunnels under civilian targets. I wish they didn't do that. But when Israel shoots children in the head, 3 American doctors went to Gaza. Dr. Fayaz Sidwa, Dr. Irfan Galaria, and a Jewish American doctor called Dr. Mark Perlmutter. All of them came back at separate times, said children were brought into hospitals we were in with gunshot to the head, sniper shots. Perfect. Exact targets. There is no tunnel that justifies shooting toddlers in the head, Israeli snipers. Shooting toddlers. Or you can tell us why. You can defend that.
Mehdi,
I'm sorry, this topic isn't funny, but Mehdi is eating this man up alive. Someone send a life jacket to this man. This man is drowning.
Mehdi, forgive me for going abstract, but
Please.
I do want to go to some principles here. So you are listing a number of specific
Yes.
incidents that you feel cumulatively add up to a very, very much an overreaction.
War crimes, John, not an overreaction. War crimes.
All right, you call them war crimes. Not so much in the abstract, but what would have been an appropriate response to what happened that would not cross the line to proportionality?
It's a good question. It's a great question. So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One is, I'm not someone who has ever, and you can look at my record on this, whether it's the UK, the US, both of my countries, I'm American, British, I've criticized targeted assassinations even by the US and the UK. I'm the loser, and people in New York, there's going to be an unpopular statement who says that people like bin Laden should be tried, not assassinated. That's who I'm, a stinking liberal. But given we live in a world where America, Britain, Israel, multiple countries, India is now accused of targeting its enemies, killing its enemies, you could have tried to take out the leaders of the group without wiping out the entire place. I find it interesting that Israel, hold on. I find it interesting that Israel was able to pinpoint kill Ismail Haniyeh in a house in a foreign country. But when it comes to
Period. This man ate and left no goddamn fucking crumbs. That's what the fuck I'm talking about. And to this day, we don't even know how they were able to pull that off because there's so many different conflicting reports. Some people say it was a drone strike. Some people say that they planted a bomb in his house. Some people say that it was deliberate or it was random or someone was standing outside and threw something in the house. Like, no one knows how it actually went down because no information has come out that's actually solid. They were able to do that. They have been able to pinpoint certain Hamas and Hezbollah targets within Lebanon as well, within Beirut as well. They did that about a month ago. You have the technology to pinpoint people and murder them. You just deliberately choose not to.
Gaza, when it comes to the Gaza Strip, they had to wipe out the whole place. They had to reduce it to 42 million tons of rubble. And one final point, I just got on factual points. Elon, they're not your neighbors, they're people you occupy, just to be clear.
Period! That's what I'm fucking talking about! Finally! 30 minutes into it and he finally brought it up. 8, left no crumbs.
So, I'm hoping you'll let point number 2 slide and please take on point number 1. What Mehdi's saying that there would have been a self-defense response that he feels might have been more appropriate, that he also feels would have been within the capability of the Israeli military. What's your response to that?
Notice the general pattern of argumentation we're seeing here. Gosh, October 7th was terrible. Hamas shouldn't have done that. Gosh, Hamas built tunnels under schools and hospitals. It shouldn't have done that. The question is what Israel may legitimately do once
No. That's not the question I asked you.
No, but I'm
explaining. It's what you did.
And his response.
It's what you did.
And Mr. Hassan's response.
Oh, man.
Is, well, if Israel could take out a terrorist leader thousands of miles away who wasn't expecting that he could be targeted, surely it can reach the terrorists who are hiding inside a bunker, under a hospital, probably surrounded by hostages as human shields. Hamas rigged the battlefield. Hamas rigged the battlefield to shield its military assets under civilians, and it left Israel with no option of getting to those leaders.
Okay, no option, no other option. No option is what your opponent is saying.
So first of all, as we've discussed, and I'm here all night, Elon can take his time, they killed 15 members of the Doss family, 7 children.
We can continue this at the reception afterwards if you want.
And I'll happily ask you, why did the government that you served in kill 15 innocent people in an apartment building? Hold on, this is very important because there's no evidence Hamas was there. He's not even tried to make that claim.
Mehdi, just in the interest of time, you've asked it. It's become a rhetorical question.
It's crucial to the argument. Elon wants to go to abstract tunnels.
When he says there was no other option, what is your response to that?
Well, no one in the world agrees with that. That's why Israel's become a pariah in the world, because even
what was the option, Mr. Hassan? What would you have had us do?
Even Joe Biden, the most
what does October 7th justify?
I already answered that question. Even Joe Biden, the most pro-Israel president of my lifetime, who has backed Israel with weapons and arms, has gone on the record saying too much indiscriminate bombing. You've killed too many innocent people. Even the people on your own side say you're killing too many people, Elon. But Mr. you will not accept that.
Mr. Hassan, too many people have been killed. The number of people who should have been killed is 0. Too many people were killed when Hamas's psychopath leaders, who are funded by your paymasters in Qatar, maybe you share a slap.
All right. Let's please bullet with that.
I'm going to respond to that.
No. It's another cheap shot, and I don't want to entertain cheap shots. I want to go to you, Elon, with this question. When you say that's
not fair. You have to let Mehdi respond to a claim like that. What do you mean? What do you mean that's another cheap shot? I don't want to hear it. Okay, then don't host a fucking debate.
The war is justified. Killing in war can only be justified if it serves a greater good. What's the greater good that's being served at this moment?
Mr. Donovan, this war is not justified because Hamas should not have started this war in the first place.
Well, the question is whether you are arguing, you are answering the question, yes, Israel's actions are justified.
The response is an attempt to prevent the next October 7th massacre. Well, on October 7th, Hamas showed us what it was capable of doing, and they immediately went on TV and said October 7th, October 10th, October 1 millionth. Everything we do is justified. We're a nation of martyrs, they said. We're proud to sacrifice millions of martyrs if that's what it takes. And we are trying to stop October 7th and to do so in a way that minimizes the cost to their civilians.
Let me just deal with the last point and the previous point, which is The idea, let's just be real here. And a lot of military experts say this, but you don't even need military experts. You just need common sense. The idea that you prevent another October the 7th or that you destroy Hamas by making tens of thousands of Palestinian children orphans is insane. It doesn't protect Israel. Forget Gaza. It doesn't protect Israel. And let me just deal with this classic. My paymasters in Qatar. Yes, I host a show for Al Jazeera English. Let's just be very clear. In December, the New York Times published a very, very long piece.
Come on. Nobody
very
cares.
important
Nobody
here. Very important
cares.
here. It's relevant to the debate. The New York Times.
All right,
published
make
a
it
very long
relevant.
piece.
Please make it.
I just knew Mehdi was going to respond. Chat, you were right. You know damn well Mehdi is going to respond to that anyways on his turn, period.
Relevant.
New York Times published a very long piece which said a month before October the 7th, the head of the Mossad, David Barnier, went to Doha, Qatar, and the Qataris said, "Do you want us to keep sending money to Gaza?" And he went back to Netanyahu. He said, "What should I say?" And Netanyahu said, "Yes, please." And he went back. He said, "Yes, please send the money to Gaza." Elon went to work for the government of Benjamin Netanyahu a month after thatwards. He's never apologized for that to the Israeli people. Benjamin Netanyahu's never apologized to that to the Israeli people. So if anyone should answer questions about Qatari funding of Hamas, allegedly, reportedly, whatever you want to call it, it's the Israeli government that facilitated it for many, many years. Elon was in that government. He's the spokesperson for that government.
It was a terrible mistake to allow Qatari money into
When they really fuck up, like the Israeli government does this a lot. When they really fuck up and they absolutely have no answer, they're just like, well, it was a terrible mistake. Like, you need a better response. If you're going to be calling him a Qatari shill, you better have a response for why your own spokesperson, your own boss was taking money from Qatar.
to Gaza on the mistaken belief that if we improve civilian life in Gaza, create jobs, create opportunity, Hamas's psychopath leaders won't launch this war. They went straight on TV and said, we tricked the Israelis. We made them think that we were concerned about the civilians in Gaza, all the while we were taking that money to build the tunnels and the weapons and the rockets we are firing at Israel. If we had known, Mr. Hasan, what Hamas was going to do on October 7th, perhaps we should have started a preemptive war to eliminate that threat before they could have burned the semen of children alive on October 7th. But we didn't.
Okay.
Hamas tricked us,
Time out.
and we won't
Time out.
repeat the same mistake again.
Time out. Going to take a little bit of a 10-second breath and slightly lower the temperature, but only slightly. Elon, you were making the argument that Israel's actions are justified in the pursuit of the destruction of Hamas. We've come to the point, though, where even Israeli military officials are saying it can't be destroyed. Therefore, what happens to that argument that the justification is the destruction of Hamas if it's an organization, a movement that can't be destroyed?
Of course Hamas can be removed from power, just like ISIS was removed from power. ISIS is now a terrorist organization that is trying to blow up concerts in Austria. It no longer controls territory the size of Austria. Following this war, we cannot allow the Hamas terrorist regime, it's not an organization, it's a terror regime and a terror army, to regroup, restock, rearm, and keep shooting rockets at our towns while it is still holding civilians. It is a regime that must be removed from power because we know exactly what it wants to do if given half a chance, and that is to do October 7th again and again. And Israel's war, Mr. Hasan, I'll yield the stage to you and ask you, eliminating the Hamas terror regime, removing it from power, a legitimate military objective, yes or no?
Of course, it's a legitimate military objective for Israel. And that's what I quoted the ICC chief prosecutor saying, but you're doing a very bad job of it. What's interesting?
Do I understand that after October 7th? Do I understand? No, because I want to clarify and understand we're on the same page.
You want to clarify the guy who can't answer why you killed 15 civilians?
No, I want to understand that we are on the same page. Do you agree that
I'll answer your
after
questions
October
when you answer
7th,
mine.
it was legitimate for Israel to remove the Hamas terror regime in order to prevent another October 7th? It's a yes or no question, Mr. Hasan.
No, it's not. It's a loaded question. I'm going to say it was legitimate for Israel to defend its citizens inside of Israel. It's not legitimate to occupy Palestinian territory for decades on end. And let me answer. Can I actually answer what you came to me for?
If I can rebut,
let me answer John's question. Let me answer
Elon, you've had about 2 or 3 minutes in a row. Go
you
ahead,
asked a
please.
very interesting question of Elon. You pointed out that he keeps saying, notice the sleight of hand. You said that he said, and he said it many times, not just here, Hamas should be destroyed. When you asked him, Israeli military experts in general say it can't be destroyed. Notice what Elon said? He said, remove from power. Quickly move the goalpost there. Because he knows that Hamas can't be destroyed by these means. In fact, the former head of Israel's
Israel
military,
said from
let me
the
finish
very
my point.
beginning.
The former head of Israel's military, who was a member of Netanyahu's war cabinet, he said earlier this year, quote, anyone who says you can destroy Hamas is telling tall tales. So it's not me calling Elon Levy a liar. It's the former head of the Israeli military.
Mr. Hasan, from the beginning, Israel has said that its goals are to remove Hamas from power and dismantle its ability to wage war again and to live up its threat of repeat October 7th. And that is why I ask you, after October 7th, was it legitimate for Israel to remove Hamas from power in order to eliminate the threat of repeat October 7th? Yes or no?
Very simple answer. Israel has the right to defend its citizens in its territory. It doesn't have a right to be an occupier. It doesn't have a right to... Let me finish the point, because you think they're your neighbors. The International Court of Justice says Gaza and the West Bank are occupied. They've been occupied every day since 1967.
Finally! Okay, I was waiting for Mehdi Hasan to say this. I was waiting for him to say what the ICC and ICJ ruled when it comes to the state of Israel and whether it being legitimate or not. Because that's a huge point of contention within this conversation, right? You want to talk about there are neighbors, they're this, they're that, they're the third, when a court literally ruled that your existence is illegal on the land that you're on. So, yeah, that needs to be said. That needs to be brought up.
You did not withdraw in 2005. You blockaded.
I'd like to explain. What the purpose here is of the legal fiction.
And I've already answered the question, Elon. I've made the point that even if I was an Israeli general trying to destroy Hamas, killing thousands of innocent people only helps Hamas. Every terrorism expert in the world says you're a recruiting sergeant for extremist groups when you go and kill innocent civilians.
Mr. Hasan, whether this war...
Time out, Elon, time out. I have a question for whoever wants to jump on it. Is Israel's war in Gaza making Israel more secure?
When this war began, Hamas had a fearsome missile arsenal that rained thousands of missiles on our cities. I had to keep running into a rocket shelter. Israel has now eliminated the threat of rocket fire from Gaza. It has cut off its smuggling routes. It has destroyed its missile silos, and it has destroyed Hamas's weapons capabilities. That alone has made us safer and makes it easier to sleep in our beds at night.
Three quick things. Number one, the Israelis went to Supreme Court recently, and they were having an argument in Israel's Supreme Court, and they put in the official filing that we do not control Gaza. Even after all this time, Hamas is still in control of lots of parts of Gaza. So they say the honest stuff when you're not looking. It's true. Number two, I interviewed Ami Ayalon recently, former head of Shin Bet, former Israeli admiral. He said very explicitly, Israel will not be safe until we give Palestinians freedom. This is his words, not my words.
I mean, we keep going back to this talking point, right? In almost every single stream, we go back to the same talking point. Hamas is an idea. You cannot get rid of an idea. Giving people freedoms and allowing them to live freely on the land that they're from is an idea. The idea of freedom does not die. The idea of resistance does not die. The idea of fighting for the land that is yours, for the land that your ancestors have been living on for hundreds and thousands of years, that is not an idea. That is not something that you can just kill. That's an idea. So until you do not free the Palestinian people and allow them to live freely on their land, the way that they deem properly and right to, you will never be safe.
And number three, I'm glad you had a bomb shelter to protect you, because the Al-Dos family in Gaza did not have a bomb shelter to protect them.
Okay. Another question. We have not yet talked about the hostages, and we should. Is Israel's action in Gaza going to is it for the benefit of the hostages?
Absolutely. Israel is fighting to bring the hostages home while Hamas is starving and torturing and raping them.
There were 3 Israeli hostages who ran out holding white flags, yelling in Hebrew, running towards their own military, begging for their military to save them. Do you want to know what the Israeli military did? They shot all 3 of them. You want to know why? Because the Israeli military themselves said that they thought it was Hamas trying to act and play out like they are Israeli hostages, and they somehow learned how to speak Hebrew so that they could threaten the IDF. They killed them. We're talking about multiple Israeli hostages being found dead due to Israeli bombardment. The Israeli soldiers themselves have had close contact with hostages and killed them because their intent to going into the Gaza Strip was not to save the hostages, it was to kill as many people as they can. So we're having this conversation of, oh, you know, the goal and blah, 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 blah. No. The goal is not to save the hostages. The goal is to eradicate Palestinian people so that you can freely take their land, and that you can expand into southern Lebanon as well as expand into Golan Heights in Syria and eventually start a war with Iran. That's your fucking goal. Your goal is not your hostages because you don't give a fuck about your hostages. Your hostages in your mind are collateral damage.
Managed in November because Hamas was being clobbered and it wanted a breather. They released nearly half of the hostages. We've sent in special forces to rescue hostages in raids my opponent has condemned. Israel is fighting to put the military pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, but Hamas doesn't want to release the hostages. And the reason it doesn't want to release the hostages is that it knows that the longer this war goes on and the more suffering it generates among its own people in Gaza, the more it advances its own goal of isolating Israel. And Mr. Hasan, it pains me that you do not seem to realize the role that you play within Hamas's strategy when you deflect blame onto Israel. Never demand any accountability. From the Hamas regime. When you know that Hamas's goal is to maximize suffering, you give it a reason to drag on this war. If you want it to let the hostages go, you should tell
of all
Qatar
the nonsense
to
you've said
pressure
tonight,
Hamas to free the hostages.
of all the demonstrably untrue things you've said tonight, this is the big one. So apparently, if you want a deal to end the war, you're enabling Hamas's strategy.
No.
That's what you just said.
No,
I'm enabling Hamas's strategy.
But you have systematically undermined every leverage Israel has to free the hostages.
You know who's undermining?
Stop pretending
Can I
you
answer
care
the question?
about the hostages.
Of the two of us, hold on. Of the two of us, whose strategy has released more hostages, mine or yours? Because I supported a ceasefire. And we got, hold on.
Our strategy. Your strategy is to give cover for Hamas's war crime.
Let him finish, please.
Over 100 hostages were released last November in the pause, in the ceasefire deal. A lot of Israelis wanted that to continue. Hostages' families wanted that to continue.
Yes.
Can I finish my answer? Netanyahu said no. In fact, I interviewed Zahiro Moore, whose uncle Avraham Munda was horribly killed in Gaza. Zahiro Moore, by the way, was arrested today. He's been arrested and attacked by the Israeli government that Elon served in multiple times. He said to me, Netanyahu and the government that Elon was part of, always choose the wrong way. Ever since October the 8th, everything they do is directed at not getting the hostages back. That is the plain truth. That is the nephew of a hostage. They don't want you to hear about the hostages. Elon and people like Elon use the hostages as political pawns. The hostages' families are standing on the streets of Tel Aviv opposing the Netanyahu government, calling for a ceasefire, calling for a deal.
That's true. They just had their biggest protest maybe a week or two ago where they had more than 500,000 people in the streets. I'm not saying that they were protesting. They were there to save Palestinian people because I don't think the majority of Israeli society gives a shit about Palestinian people.
They don't like Elon leaving. They don't support Elon.
Mr. Hasan, how many hostage rallies have you spoken at? How many hostages' mothers have you embraced and hugged them and told them, I will hit you whatever you need? I was at Central Park. I was at Central Park last Sunday at the rally for the hostages. You were not. Mr. Hasan, if you really care about the hostages,
let me ask you, we got
I have a spare hostage pin here.
Damn, Yoav just really lost shit here. He's been keeping his cool, but he's also been getting ripped to shreds. So, this debate, it's progressively getting more and more fiery too, which is kind of funny.
If you want to show them you care, you're welcome to put it on your platform.
All right, this is fantastic. Let's go. So,
put it on. Show them you care. Show them you care. I am in daily contact with the hostage families. I tell them I will do whatever it takes to help you get your kids home. Show them you care and stop trying to exploit the
Okay.
suffering.
Elon, allow him to respond. You've got your bit of stagecraft.
So
Please take it.
Let's be clear.
You know what I also love about Israeli spokespeople? They use a lot of anecdotal evidence. And what I mean by that is they use a lot of I've done this, I've done that, I've spoken to these people, I know. But the anecdotal, I have done this, I have done that doesn't give me shit, babes. I want statistics. I want proof. I want proof that your government that you have served under, which is Netanyahu, actually gives a shit about the hostages, because last time I checked, there were over 500,000 people in the streets protesting against Netanyahu, the same man that you keep defending, which, by the way, going beyond of the fact if you don't agree with the Israeli state, etc., the government, everything's just fucked, right? Netanyahu himself, prior to October 7th, had one of the lowest approval ratings of almost any prime minister globally. That man's disapproval rating was above 80%. And I don't know if you know anything about polling and politics, but if your disapproval rating is above 80%, you best believe everyone fucking hates you. You're not a liked person, okay? And Netanyahu knows when this war is over, his job is also over. That man's getting kicked the fuck out because nobody fucking likes him, not just within Israel, but outside. The global populace does not like that man either, disapproves of him. They believe he's a war criminal.
Let's be clear. You saw the very, very performative outrage there from Elon there. To be clear, don't you lecture me about hostages when your government has killed more hostages than it has rescued. That's on you. That's on you. And
That is on Hamas.
Bro, damn. Mehdi Hasan said, "Mic fucking drop. Fuck you, bitch." That's crazy. That's crazy.
Let me answer this.
All right.
I need to finish this point.
I'm going to let you finish this point, and then we're moving on.
I will happily support this pin because I support the release of all the hostages and let me finish. And I support the release of thousands of Palestinian detainees being raped and tortured and children. Do you support that? Let's wear it together. Do you support the release? Do you support the release of Palestinians?
I do not support,
do you support the release
of terrorists.
of Palestinian children? Do you support the release of Palestinian children?
Mr. Hasan, anyone
let's get some space here.
He can't answer the question.
Mr. Hasan, he won't get on the hostage.
I support the release of all innocent people.
Mehdi?
He doesn't. That's all you've got.
Once
Elon.
again.
Gimmicks.
Once again.
All you've got.
All right.
He said that's all you got is gimmicks. Yo, this man got obliterated. This is bad.
One more question before we pivot to some questions from some journalists who are joining us. And I want to talk about America's involvement in this situation. The U.S. has been largely supporting Israel. If the war in Israel is unjustified, that implicates the U.S. in an unjust war. If the war is justified, then we have an ally that requires our help. Which is it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
We have, it's about U.S. involvement in the war. If the war is unjustified, that implicates the U.S. in an unjust war. If it's justified, we have an ally that requires our help.
When this war began, President Biden said that Israel is facing sheer, pure, unadulterated evil. It was so obvious in the moment of shock after October 7th that for Israel to defend itself, it has to dismantle the Hamas terror regime, that President Barack Obama said we must stand by our ally Israel as it dismantles Hamas. The United States has made valuable support to Israel in its goal of bringing down the Hamas regime. What we need is pressure on Hamas and its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, to let the hostages go. That pressure has not been forthcoming.
I mean,
Wait, I'm sorry. Did I miss something? What does Iran have to do with releasing the hostages?
October 7th. That for Israel to defend itself, it has to dismantle the Hamas terror regime, that President Barack Obama said we must stand by our ally Israel as it dismantles Hamas. The United States has made valuable support to Israel in its goal of bringing down the Hamas regime. What we need is pressure on Hamas and its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, to let the hostages go. That pressure has not been forthcoming.
Sorry, what the fuck does what Hamas does with the hostages have to do with Qatar? I mean, Iran, sure, I guess there's an argument for it because they do fund Hamas, but Qatar? I just feel like at this point he's pulling shit out of his ass.
Before I came on stage, Gershon Baskin, who's Israel's most famous hostage negotiator, he WhatsApped me and said he's got a deal, 3-week deal on the table with Hamas that Hamas has agreed to release all the hostages and end the war. He says it's with Netanyahu. The ball's in Netanyahu's court. So when he keeps going on about hostages, tell him to speak to his former boss to agree to a hostage.
Gershon Baskin is the negotiator
As for the United
in whose
States,
deal to free
do
Gilad
stop interrupting,
Shalit,
Elon.
we
You've
released
had your performance.
Yehia Sinwar.
As for the United States, it is tragic to me as a citizen of the United Kingdom and the United States that my two countries have armed Israel as it carries out what the ICJ has called a plausible genocide,
No,
as it arms
has
a prime
not.
minister
Mr.
who is wanted
Hasan.
for war crimes.
Mr. Hasan.
The ICC chief prosecutor has called for the arrest of Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu. The American government should not be arming a man wanted for war crimes. And Elon Levy should have began his speech tonight apologizing for working for a man who is wanted for war crimes by the ICC chief prosecutor.
Mr. Donver, you called me to account at the beginning of the debate and said I should not have called my opponent a liar. The former president of the ICJ, Joan Donoghue, had to go
and
on
many
TV.
other judges disagreed with her.
Had to go on TV
The
to
American
explain
judge who
Let
worked
him
that
speak.
her ruling did not define there was a plausible genocide.
Actually, the other
She had
judges
to go on
disagreed with her.
TV to
Selective
refute
quoting.
the lie. The only reason for you to make that
ICC
lie,
chief prosecutor
the
called for an
only
arrest warrant, Elon.
whose arrest warrant claims were
Did the
based on
ICC
lies.
All right, this is not helping. We are not able to hear what anybody is saying. We're not able to hear what anybody's saying. You are both talking at the same time, and I'm talking at the third time. So let's stop this.
Convenient.
I have a question for each of you before we pivot, which I want to ask you if you can answer without attacking one another. And I'm also curious to see if you can do it in under 20 seconds, because we're just curious. Each of you came to this debate, and by your decision to participate, we saw on social media that both of you were attacked by members of your own camp for being even on the stage with somebody who's holding the opposing view. But you showed up anyway. Elon, why did you show up?
Because Iran, the Palestinian nationalists, and their allies are waging a war of misinformation that has one purpose. They want to destroy Israel. And they think it will be much easier to destroy Israel if they convince the world that Israel deserves to be destroyed. A full campaign of the most ridiculous lies to try to convince good, ordinary Americans that when they're ready to pull the trigger and massacre us once more, they should stand to one side and say, well, the Jews had it coming. And I'm not willing to allow that to happen.
I mean, look, I believe that what is happening in Gaza, the killing of 16,000 children, the genocide in Gaza is the great moral tragedy of our time, the great crime of our time. And I will go almost anywhere and take a stage with almost anyone to try and bring that war to an end and convince people that the war needs to end now.
We have some journalists. We have 4 journalists who are each going to ask one, I hope, very short question. There are people who have been writing about the area for a long time, particularly about the situation.
He didn't let him answer because prior to him asking the question, he said each of them have 20 seconds to respond. Like an immediate response, 20 seconds. So the first guy gave it, and then Mehdi gave his 20-second response. And then the other guy wanted to respond, but that wasn't like how it was laid out.
Now, and they are certainly not monolithic in their own views. I first want to go to Peter Beinart. He's a journalist who's written for Time, the New York Times, The Atlantic. He's former editor of the New Republic and editor-at-large of Jewish Currents. Peter, if you can stand up, there's a microphone, I believe, in the aisle for you.
Elon, you suggested that the goal of the war was to depose Hamas from power, but on October 11th, Benjamin Netanyahu said the goal of the war was to destroy Hamas. On October 12th, Yoav Gallant said, the defense minister said the goal was to wipe it from the earth, because I think they understood that even deposing Hamas would not necessarily make Hamas less of a fearsome threat. The Taliban didn't become less of a fearsome threat to the United States once they stopped holding power. Saddam and his forces didn't become less of a fearsome threat once they no longer held power. They recognized that winning this war meant destroying Hamas. And yet your own former colleague, Daniel Hagari,
Peter,
the IDF
what's your
spokesman,
question?
said it's not possible. To be clear, I'd like you to be on the record. Do you think it's possible to destroy Hamas, or were Netanyahu and Gallant wrong?
I believe it is possible to remove the Hamas terror regime from power. Whether leaders used belligerent rhetoric that exaggerated the goals of the war. No, look, Hamas needs to be destroyed. It's an idea. Some ideas deserve to be destroyed. And whether that idea is destroyed or not, depends on the lessons that the people of Gaza take from this war. Will they conclude that terrorism is a dead end, that their leaders have repeatedly led them into disaster after disaster as part of their forever war against the Jewish state in any borders whatsoever, or will they take the lesson that in fact they were rewarded for the October 7th massacre? That is what is at stake here, and we are trying to convince the people of Gaza terrorism is a dead end. There is no light at the end of that tunnel.
Mehdi, you also get to respond.
Wow, he's trying to convince the people of Gaza that terrorism has no light at the end of the tunnel while he's actively destroying the whole entire strip and starving them and not having any active hospitals, destroying every single health facility, killing all of the doctors, killing all of the journalists. I mean, shit. I hope he really succeeds in, trying to convince them of anything at this point. Do you, I don't understand, this man doesn't seem stupid to me, right? He seems like he understands shit. I just don't really know if the conversation is whether he believes what he's saying or if he's getting paid enough to force himself to believe it.
I think Peter made the point very eloquently. It's a nonsensical war aims. The real war aims, of course, are what the Israeli ministers say. When Smotrich says the aim of the war is to annihilate Gaza, that is the aim. I take him at his face value.
Hasan,
he literally said that.
Smotrich
and when they say this stuff, when they talk
camp.
about resettling Gaza, when they talk about staying in Gaza, that is what they mean. This is not about... Can I finish an answer, Elon, one time?
Not government policy and goes against government.
I would just say this.
Yeah, let him finish,
If you want to convince the people of Gaza that terrorism is a dead end, then stop inflicting terrorism on them.
Our next question comes from Gillian Lederman. Gillian is an editorial fellow at the Wall Street Journal, former chief executive chair of the Israel Leadership Network. Gillian, thanks for joining us, and what's your question?
My question is, given the current circumstances, do you believe that Israel pulling out of Gaza in 2005 was the right decision?
Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005 and never wanted to go back. It gave...
Oh my God. When people say this, it pisses me off so much because it's what do you mean you withdrew from the Gaza Strip? You still have them living under siege. You still control their electricity, their water, their food. What are you talking about? You pulled out. You don't let them go in or out. You don't let them do anything. What do you mean you pulled out? What the fuck? What is the definition of you pulling out of the Gaza Strip? Because if you still control every single aspect of how they live, including their source of, medication, food, electricity, water, you didn't pull out of the Gaza Strip.
Gave them Gaza. They had the option to turn it into Singapore. They chose to turn it into Mosul. They could have had a thriving state in Gaza.
People in Gaza had the opportunity to turn Gaza into the next Singapore. There's no way this man actually believes what he's saying. How can you build a Singapore when you literally control how much food, water, and electricity they get on a daily basis? Oh my God, it's giving fucking delusional.
After Israel pulled out and Jewish organizations paid to donate the greenhouses, instead they chose to rig Gaza for war. The tunnel network under Gaza is the largest public works project the Palestinians have ever undertaken. They did it for the sake of the October 7th massacre.
Was it a mistake to pull out? That was the question.
I don't know.
Okay. No, fair enough. Fair enough.
Simple answer is, of course, Israel did not pull out of Gaza, as the ICJ has pointed out just recently. Gaza is occupied territory. Let me put it very simply to you. What Elon doesn't tell you is when they pulled out, they kept control of Gaza's land borders,
not with Egypt.
Waters.
Not with Egypt.
With
of course
Egypt.
we controlled
Israel
the borders.
and Egypt
We're on the other side
kept the
of
land
it.
borders. Have you noticed I can never finish an answer without an interruption? The land borders, the sea waters, the air, and wait for it. And the population registry. If you're born in Gaza, you have to be registered with the Israelis. If you were born in New York and your birth had to be registered with a foreign country, would you say you were occupied or not occupied? Would you say you're a free people or an unfree people? It's an absolute lie. The occupation never ended.
Israel ended the occupation of Gaza in 2005.
Then why did you keep the population?
Wait,
let me interrupt you. Hold
it. We are done with the interruptions. It's just destructive. So you go.
The
You be
population
quiet.
registry
Return
isn't an
first.
interesting question because Israel runs it in cooperation with the PA as part of the Oslo Accords. Hamas is free to run its own population registry because it has effective
one
control
territory
inside
under
Gaza.
international
law. Mehdi,
Under
you'll get your shot.
international law, occupation requires the effective control of territory. Everywhere in the world, it is understood to mean boots on the ground. And the only reason to fabricate a new standard to say that just because Israel doesn't allow Hamas to build an Ismail Haniyeh International Airport means that it is occupied is as part of a campaign to try to make Israel responsible for civilians in Gaza so Hamas can take the resources and funnel them into the war machine.
We're losing sight of the question.
Briefly, very briefly. Elon, a moment ago, you all heard him proudly quoting the former president of the ICJ. The ICJ literally, the other day, said Gaza is occupied. But Elon and I went to the same university. We did the same degree. He didn't do law. He's not a lawyer. The ICJ says Gaza is occupied. It's over. The debate's over. You've lost that one.
No,
That just needs to dig his own grave at this point. This is so embarrassing. He just got murdered in this debate.
It's not the end. That is not the end. Because a basic principle of
One moment.
The ICJ disagrees. You're done.
Jillian, do you feel that your question was answered? Was it a mistake to pull out of Gaza? Because I don't. But we're going to move on. Thank you for the question.
I am kind of over that debate, I'm not going to lie to you. And also, it was just them answering journalist questions. So, what are my thoughts on this debate? I think that Mehdi Hasan absolutely murdered the man he was opposing. When it comes to Israeli propaganda, they have a exact playbook and they always run through it. In every single debate, it can be peers, it can be open to debate, it can be any platform. They take the same talking points and they run it back. It's been a year since, October 7th, almost a year, and they still talk about human shields. They still talk about how they give people warnings. I mean, it's come to a point where they just keep continuing the same shit over and over again, to the point where it's like, you really either have to be willfully stupid or actually drinking the Kool-Aid if you believe what they're saying. But make sure you subscribe to me if you want more videos like this. See you guys next time.